So I am James Towers. I'm a front-end engineer at Immersive Labs, and I'm here to talk to you about all the fun stuff that's been added to CSS and JS over the last 2-3 years, and the stuff that is in progress but soon to be released, so the stuff that we will be able to play with in the next year or so. There's a ton of stuff. The JS and CSS elves have been very busy. So yeah. So the elves, the JavaScript elves, I don't know why they're people. The people who decide what goes into the JavaScript language are a group of 100 developers and academics called the TC39. So equivalent for CSS is the CSS Working Group. Very similar vibe to TC39. There's a few more of them, but it's the same kind of vibe. The developers, academics, and organization reps. Both of these people get together every sort of 2 months to talk through various proposals and figure out whether they're ready to go on to the next stage. So the stage is, so to get for a feature or proposal to make its way into JavaScript or CSS, there are technically 5 stages, but the first stage is 0. This is just like, I've got an idea, here it is. Anyone can contribute. So any of us could go in and say, I've got a really good idea. You can you can just go in and suggest it. But obviously you're gonna have to back it up, right? So you can't just say like, I want Bristol JS yellow to be a new color in CSS, whatever. You've got to have a good reason and you've got to back it up. And crucially, you need an existing person from the TC39 or CSS Working Group to back you up. So someone's going to be your champion. And you need someone who's going to support you and help you get it through to the next stage. So stage 1, proposal. This is a form proposal. It's like an RFC, really. So you outline your idea, you talk about it, and you sort of say why it's a problem, blah, blah. Yes, and you need that champion to get to stage 2, which is a usable implementation. So what you need is basically a demo of it working in a browser. It doesn't have to be fully working. It can be kind of hacky. So you can, for JavaScript, you can use Babel, or you can create a polyfill. You just have to sort of demo it working in the browser so that people can sort of use it and get a good feel for it. And you need to have a outline, it's more cemented outline of how it's going to work. Stage 3. So this needs to be running in at least one browser. So this is without the hacky sort of Babel or polyfills. And this has got to be working in at least one browser using sort of the native JS engine or whatever. But you also need high fidelity polyfills for the other browsers. If something gets to stage 3, it's highly likely that it's going to get to stage 4 and then released. The APIs might change, but you can be fairly confident that it's going to make it. And then stage 4 is where it's working in all the browsers. It's you can usually use it in Canary or beta versions of the browsers, and it's passed loads of testing by everyone, and it's going to make it through. In fact, yeah, it's going to be released in the next. If it's in stage 4, it's going to be released in the next version of the language. So, right, nitty-gritty. So the stuff, I'm going to go through the CSS stuff, and then I'm going to go through the JavaScript stuff, and then I'm going to talk about some like web APIs. So CSS, so Subgrid, big one. If anyone has used, I'm sure most of you have used Grid so far. If you've ever sort of, so what this does, it allows a nested grid element. So if you put an element with display grid inside of another element with display grid, the child grid inherits the columns from the parent. I find it a difficult thing to sort of explain in words, but this is the vibe. So you've got an element with display grid. So if you've ever had like a design from a designer, so they might give you this 8 grid or 12 grid or 16 column grid, and you want to put a hero in the middle. So you've got this grid element that uses grid, and you want to put an element in there which spans 6 columns, starting from 2 to 7. Fine, great. But that also needs to be a grid. So you want another grid in there. If you do that now, and note that this element has some padding, so 20 pixels padding. If I now put another element, another grid in there with 6 columns, the columns don't line up with the parent. So you don't really have that sort of 8-column grid layout, which the designer wants. What grid does is fix that. So you're using, so here you've got you're saying you specify how many columns you want, but for here, you just say use subgrid. And what it's done is it's lined up all the columns with the parent. The sacrifice you're making is that they're not even. So on the previous one, I do that, they're nice even columns, but here they've had to shrink them because of the padding. But it all lines up, and that's subgrid, so basically, and you can nest this as many times. So you can put as many grid as you want, and they will always line up with the original grid. And that's that. So your designers will be happy about subgrid. This is the code, so yeah, you just use, instead of stating the columns that you want and the count, you just say it's subgrid, and it will inherit from here. Container query is another big one. So this is something that's been one of the most requested features in CSS for a while. We're all familiar with media queries. It allows you to change how an element looks or how it's laid out based on the width of the viewport. So the whole viewport, the whole browser, if you like. That works very well for most cases, but it kind of falls over in a situation like this. So you've got like a search field, label field and button. You shrink it down to mobile, and you've got a nice mobile layout. That's great. So that's quite easy to do with media queries. However, if you wanted to take that form and put it in a sidebar, here the viewport is the same. So you can't use the viewport's width here because the viewport is large. It's not the stuff, the media query used here is not going to work because the viewport is large. So what container queries do is it allows you to use this container as the query, and you can change how that looks based on the space that the component has, or space that the element has, not the viewport. So here you've got, so in order to make this work, what we do currently is you say, okay, you take the styles and you just do like an override. So you do like dot sidebar search, and then you can override the styles for the search form if it's in the sidebar. But now with container queries, you can just create a single component, if you like, or a single set of search fields, and just that's it. And you can put it wherever you want, and it will adapt to the space that it has. So pretty cool. That is available currently only in Safari. By the way, I've got these things down here, and I'm going to put them up there as well, but this is where it's available now. So currently only available in Safari, but they're all coming very soon to all browsers. As a bonus, I don't know whether this is actually going to happen, but it looks like we're also going to get container queries. So now we have like viewport width and viewport height. We have these new sort of like sizing units. We will probably have container units as well. So you can size the text based on the parent it's in. This is just a demo of the container queries working. So you have a single component there, but it changes its layout based on the amount of space it has. And there's some examples. So this is a really nice use of it. You've got pagination, it's a single component, but depending on how much room it has, it changes its layout. And there's no overrides. So it's not like you don't have to do any sort of overrides for, this is whatever, like a sidebar pagination, whatever. It's just the same component, and you can just move it around and it will just adapt. Yes, and this is how you use it. So you set the contain property on the parent, and then these are your default styles, and then you've just got the container query. So if they're really simple, just like a media query, then you can just, so if the parent is more than 400 pixels, show the description and change the direction. And that's that. Hang on, tight. Sorry, I got mixed up. So this is the slide about the container units. Yeah, so we're going to get these new container, we're probably going to get the containers, so let's say query units and query min, query width, query height. It looks like we're going to get it. Don't quote me on that, but probably. Another really big CSS addition is the has selector. So this is another, like, one of the most highly requested features. It's kind of been called the parent selector. It's much more than that, but what it allows you to do is style an element based on its children. So previously, you can only sort of go top down, or well, technically bottom up. Like it's cascading style sheets. So by definition, you can only sort of style something based on its parent. You can't style something based on its child. But this changes that. So now you can style this div based if it has a paragraph tag in it, and you can make the color red. But it sounds simple, but it's some really, really cool stuff. Oh, okay. I thought I'd lost the slide. Okay. So yeah, these are some examples. This is a really great example. So you've got a form, and if there are any invalid inputs within the form, style the form by giving it a border top red. That's really cool. Like, we haven't been able to do that. The only way we've been able to do that so far is with JavaScript. I'm sure we've all done that. We've all sort of like looked for, invalid inputs, then styled a form. Now we can just do it with CSS. This is pretty cool. So you've got a figure, and if there's a caption on it, you give it a margin bottom. If it doesn't, then no margin bottom. There's some really cool stuff you can do with this. Yeah, I think this is probably the CSS feature that I'm most excited about. And you can use it now in Safari. Yeah, and soon in all the others. So onto the JavaScript side. Still on CSS. The is and where. So these are a nice way of doing bulk targeting, basically. So previously we've done this. So if you want to target multiple elements or multiple here a div, so a div with different classes, you just have to specify each selector individually. With Sass, we've been able to do some fun stuff like this with nesting, where you just define a div once and you can style all the different variants or different more specific versions of it like this. Pretty cool. But now you can do it with CSS with the is selector. So it's a way of defining a single selector and then the variations of it, or the more specific selectors with the is pseudo selector. So pretty cool. It's particularly useful, you'll see in a moment, when you've got masses of, when this gets really big, it's much nicer to use the is selectors. You can see here, instead of doing that, you're doing this, which is just much nicer. The where selector is very similar. It does the same thing and you use it in the same way. The difference is that where has zero specificity. So in this example over here, the anchors and the anchor link in the div is going to be green. Here, you're going to change it to red, but it's not going to override that. Like where has zero, so you can override that with anything. Whereas the is will override the original. So this does not sort of contribute to the specificity of a selector, where is does. Quite an important difference there. Oh, Cascade is another great one. So this is available in all browsers, which is super cool. So this is basically, it allows you to group elements into specificity layers. So you can say all of these elements that are within this layer are more or less specific than all the selectors in this layer. So it's pretty cool for like, if you've got like a date picker library and you're importing all the CSS from this library. This is the thing that's happened to me a lot, where you in order to override the colors within the sort of date picker, you've got to do super specific selectors in order to override it. You've got to do like, dot date picker div, then a TD, and then current date, whatever, in order to override it. Now, you can just put all of that date picker stuff in a layer, and then all your overrides in another layer, and it will just override without adding any more specificity. So here's the example. So you define your layers. So these are the different layers that I want. So you've got a reset, that's basic, that kind of sits at the back, that's the least specific one, and utilities is the most specific layer. So every single selector that is in the utilities layer will override these. Defaults will override these. Doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter how specific the selectors are. So here you've got the utilities layer comes after the defaults layer. So everything inside this utilities layer will override anything inside the defaults. Despite this super specific selector here, currently that would always override that because that's just an anchor, right? But now, because everything in this layer comes after the defaults layer, that will override it. So really useful for like grouping different things, different elements from different components and stuff together. This is an example of using it, like I said, as a date picker, so you can just import the entire style sheet and stick it in a layer. But this is an important thing. So if something isn't in a layer, it will override everything that is in the layer. So that's quite important. So you probably want to make sure all of your CSS is in some sort of layer, otherwise you might get unpredictable results. And then you can also nest layers like this. So yeah, you can just group them all into different types. That's that. Another pretty sweet feature, I think. And it would definitely be useful, and it would, it solves a genuine problem that I'm sure that everyone here has had. Okay, accent color, nice, easy, quick win. This one, super simple. It just gives you this little select style definition to just tweak the style. So your browsers have all these default blues for all these types of things, and accent color just gives the opportunity to just change it. So you can just stick that at the top of your style sheet if you want and just give it your brand color, then all those things will change. It's like a nice, easy, quick win. And available now, so you should be using it now. Select menu, again, another like highly requested feature is customizing the select drop-downs. We've all tried to do it, and we've all ended up doing weird hacks and using JavaScript, special components to do this kind of stuff, because it's always been so limited. But now we've got this element, so it's less of a CSS thing, but it's more of a sort of an HTML element, where it's actually a group of elements which you can use together to create highly customizable downs or list boxes and stuff. These are the different elements that you get. So you've got the select menu at the top, you've got the button, which is the thing that you press to open it, and all these different things. And you can use these together and style them all individually, crucially. And all of the accessibility stuff is taken care of. These drop-downs can be a pretty major accessibility nightmare. Doing it properly is quite difficult. But obviously, this being standard HTML, it's all taken care of. You can see here, you can mix and match. You can use it. You can put a div in there if you want and style that as you want. And as long as you use everything in a sort of the right order, you can create some pretty cool stuff. And there's some really good demos actually online of different variations of it. And some of them demos look nothing like a select menu. So really cool. Onto the JavaScript. This is where the big JS slide should be. Temporal. So this is basically the new way to handle dates in JavaScript. So the date object has been pretty limited. It's pretty crap. We don't use it because it doesn't do the things we want. Everyone probably uses moment or date functions. We've all been using these new JavaScript libraries to do the stuff that we want with dates, to manipulate dates and stuff. Temporal solves that. So it's actually written by or co-authored by the creator of Moment.js. So you can basically look at it as Moment.js, but native. So you don't have to import Moment, which is a massive library. You don't really want to, it's really good, but it's a huge library. You don't really want to use it anyway, but you don't have to now. It's because it's, yeah, so I didn't put any demos in this because it's quite a big, the API is huge. I could do a whole talk on it really. But yes, that is stage 3, so that's coming soon. Do I have anything else to say about that? No, that's it. That's something to look forward to. Another thing that has been requested for a long time is decorators. Decorators have been used for ages. I've never had to use them myself, but I think they've been used in Angular and MobX and various things, right? Yeah. Kind of Marmite, people love them, some people hate them. But yeah, they are used to extend classes, to manipulate classes or fields or methods on the class. And they actually look quite handy. When I was doing this, I was looking into them, actually they sound quite cool. TC39 have been trying to find a way to get these into the JavaScript spec for ages, I think 5-6 years. They've really struggled because there are certain rules, like TC39 and the CSS Working Group have certain rules they have to stick by, so any features can't break any old features and they can't slow the language down. And that's the problem they've had here with Decorators, is that they couldn't find a way to implement it without slowing everything else down. And in order to get it working, I think they've made some compromises. So if you've been using Decorators so far, like up until now, with the help of Babel, I would expect it to be slightly different to what you're expecting. But yes, they are coming. So loads of new stuff happening to array. So you've got array.group. It does what it says in the tin, really. It works a bit like filter, I guess. You pass it a function, and it returns an object grouped by the keys that you set. So previously, we've been using reduce to do this, and now you don't have to Google reduce on MTN anymore. You can just use to do it. So yeah, that's nice. Array.at again, nice sort of easy win. So we've all sort of, when you get the last item in an array, we bring that thing at the top. Now you can just say get the item at this index, and then the index accepts negative indexes, so you can go X numbers from the end or whatever. So nice, easy, sort of syntax sort of win, really. Yeah, that's that. Change array by copy. So we're sort of familiar with reverse and sort and splice and all these methods on the array prototype. They all mutate the original array. So if you don't want to do that at the moment, you have to sort of copy the array and then you run the function on it, and then you avoid mutating the original. These new set of functions will copy the array first and then return the altered array. So you just got reverse, sorted, and spliced. That's kind of what you'd expect. Array.with, it just adds items to the index, to the array at a specific index. So I think this has kind of been quite difficult to do, actually. Adding values at items at a specific index will now be super easy. StructuredClone, yeah, so deep cloning objects. So one of the problems with cloning objects is that they only do, well, you would do like a shallow clone, which is so you have this object here, and you can do a shallow copy by doing a spread operator. This is something I'm sure we all do a lot. The problem with doing a shallow copy is that it doesn't copy this nested object. So we'll only copy the top level keys in the object. So you can see here, here I'm changing. What am I doing? Yes, I'm making a shallow copy, then changing the job title, but it's actually also changing the original. To get around this, we use low-deep clone, which will just go for the whole object and copy it recursively. Or there's like a JSON sort of stringify pass, whatever, hack, which is pretty ugly. It works, but it's pretty ugly and it's not particularly performant. Now with structuredClone, you can just do a deep clone of the object and not have to worry about any of that. You know that all of the new object that you've got is completely independent and you're not going to mess anything else up unexpectedly. This you can use now. This is available now, so you can use it in all, and you can use it in all browsers. And then, so moving on to web APIs. So these are kind of new things which are being added to the browser. None of these are available yet, but I think they're worth mentioning. Fetch priority, so this allows you to prioritize the loading of resources. So use it like this, so you just have a new fetch priority attribute on your scripts or iframes or images. You can even use it with fetch. Obviously, you don't just want to put fetch priority high on everything, because then you kind of lose the point. But it's really, the aim of this is just to speed up the time to first contentful pane on your page, whatever. Right? So like iframes are notorious, and if you ever load an iframe, if you use them, but they might load, and then all of a sudden all the content below it sort of jumps when all the content in the iframe loads. Now you can say actually like concentrate on the iframe, get that loaded quickly, so you have less of the junk, or hopefully eliminate the junk. So a nice way of just sort of prioritizing different things, because the browser will just go top down and load things in that order. But now you can sort of say actually load this first and whatever. So this is awesome. And this is relatively new, and I haven't really had time to play with it. I'm just going to sort of play the video of it happening. So there's a great video by Jake Archibald where he demos it. This is just a clip of the bit that he's done. So there's no JavaScript. This is just the page transition API and some CSS transitioning from completely separate pages. So this is not even like this. Let's play that again. Like that's awesome. Like you can just transition different elements of the page around to, like this is something that you have to orchestrate at the moment, with your single page application. It takes loads of time, but now you can just get it for not free, but like, there is some work to do. This is kind of this is the sort of JavaScripty bit. It's pretty simple. And then you assign, there's some CSS as well. So you basically assign the different things which are going to transition to and from in the CSS. I meant to put an example of that in the slide, but I forgot. So that's, very exciting. Another one, virtual keyboard API. This is pretty cool. So like your keyboard on touch devices, this allows you to show and hide it programmatically, get information about the size of it, and then crucially, so you can actually style other elements based on it. So you can have, like here, example, the search bar. So you could have a search bar sit above position it relative to the keyboard. So the keyboard comes up and down, the search bar goes up and down and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. It uses these CSS n variables. So you've just got a few of these, which those just sort of translate to the height of the thing, and it falls back to 50. This to me feels like the kind of thing that Safari will just shut down and say, no way, you're not doing that. So I don't know. It's probably going to, you can get it in Chrome, but I don't know. I'd be surprised if it happens in Safari. In fact, it's available in Chrome. Navigation API. So this is the kind of replacement for the history API. This is a sort of an API designed especially for single page applications. So all the current, all the routers and stuff that you use for single applications, they currently use the history API, which was created and designed before anyone really used single page applications. So it's not really fit for purpose. This is a brand new API designed to handle all of the routing stuff that your single page application does. So again, pretty cool. I think the API looks pretty straightforward. I mean, realistically, if you use a single page application, you're probably not going to have to use it. It will probably, React Router or Vue Router, whatever we'll use instead, but interesting nonetheless. That's it. There you go. Right, that's it. Yeah, so lots of stuff. And I left loads of stuff out. There's loads of really cool stuff. A lot of it is aimed at sort of, library maintainers. And I've kind of picked stuff which I would think I would use myself under the assumption that you would also find it useful. But there's tons of stuff. You can go and look at it all. This is really, the JavaScript proposals are really nice to just look through. They're like, it's all on GitHub. It's really nice, easy to read. This, not so much. It's very difficult to get your head around, but by all means, try. That's it, really.